Hello and welcome to Barry's Economics. I'm releasing an extra video this week because about 3 months ago I made a video, and at the heart of the video is a term called homophily. And the reason I'm re-releasing it is because 2 days ago Gary Stevenson actually did a longer video, a fantastic video, and I really recommend watching it. A response to how the establishment responds to Gary and how the establishment responds to a lot of different economics ideas. And I'm releasing the video because this is actually quite a good companion piece because it speaks to the psychology of it and why it's not personal. What happens if you live in the halls of power and you mostly know people that have more than enough or have more than enough power? Your view, in a very specific, repeatable, scientific way, your view gets blinkered. And the reason why it's important to say that is because it's not in the current debates about who makes the decisions in the world we live in. And I think it's a hugely important piece of research that focuses clearly on, scientifically on, who we need in the rooms and why we need those people in the room in order to make decisions that are good for everyone. So yeah, this is that video. I hope you enjoy it as a companion piece to Gary's video this Sunday. Thanks for watching. So there's a comforting idea that most of us carry around about the world, that if you put the cleverest people in the room, you get the cleverest answer. It just feels common sense, like adult, reassuring. Let's ask the experts. Let's get the facts straight. In fact, the podcast The Rest is Politics, hugely successful, is really representative of that idea. Like, Alistair and Rory, they are the experts. Alistair Campbell has literally run a government, and Rory is a politician from the opposing party who's from Oxford, Harvard, ex-diplomat, and that's why the podcast is such a hit. They are the experts. And it's an idea that I just intuitively believe myself too. It just feels right that putting a few super experienced or super intelligent professors in a room intellectually is like, I don't know, summoning Captain Planet. It just feels like that's how to make the magic happen. But decision science says something deeply uncomfortable to that common sense. It disagrees with it 100%. Decision science says that actually, when clever people come together, they've often had a similar education or similar backgrounds, and therefore they share the same blind spots. And there's a technical word for that, homophily, which, put simply, means people like themselves. Same education, same social codes, same ideas of what sounds serious and what sounds naive and what sounds responsible. People like themselves. And the thing about homophily is that right now, you look around with rampant inequality and in the country and the rich getting richer, and it's really easy to look around and just go, those bastards, they all get together and like it must be a conspiracy. They're deliberately exerting political levers to keep us down. But actually, to explain that, you don't need a conspiracy. You don't need a cabal. Actually, you only need homophily. Homophily doesn't make people stupid, but it makes them miss the target. And in fact, they don't just miss the target, they reinforce each other's mistakes. Or in the technical terms, their errors are correlated. And I'll explain what that means with a few key studies. And I'm going to start with an experiment by somebody called Francis Galton that happened 100 years ago at a country fair, okay? Francis asked people at the fair to guess the weight of a cow. Farmers, shopkeepers, children, drunks. Crucially, nobody with a podcast, okay? But they were all people with wildly different perspectives. And while no one person got it right individually, not even the farmers, when all of the guesses were averaged, they landed on almost exactly the correct weight. Why? Because the crowd all made different mistakes. Because accuracy in complex problems comes from uncorrelated error. People were wrong in different ways, and those errors cancel each other's out. That's the basic mechanism. Now, if you look at economics and politics today, you actually see the opposite situation. There are a majority of similar people in positions of influence and power in our societies. To use just a basic stat, according to research done by the Sutton Trust, whereas only 7%, right, of the UK population are privately educated, roughly 40% of people in politics, media, and high-level public service are privately educated. And that's not a mix of perspectives. That's a reunion. But it's an ecosystem. Basically, when one group of people are in a majority, they set the tone. And you might say, but Barry, the present Labour government, uniquely to any government in the last 50 years, they're not predominantly people that went to private schools. No, but the overall statistics remain the same. It's the waters you swim in. The research, the science is absolutely clear about the danger when that happens, especially when you look at complex problem solving, which, let's face it, that's what the economy is, right? Researchers Liu Hong and Scott Page studied how different groups solve difficult problems. And they set up a complex quiz. Team A is made of top of the class, educated university types, the best of the best. But Team B is a bit messier. One engineer, one nurse, one shop owner, one history nerd. But none of them are the best at anything. So you'd expect Team A to win, right? Hands down, be a bloodbath. But again and again, Hong and Page found the opposite. Why? Because Team A all attacked the question in the same way. And if that approach fails, they all fail together. They have the same assumptions. But Team B comes from the problem from different angles. They each misunderstand it, yes, but they misunderstand it differently. So even if none of them are spot on, none of them are brilliant, they explore more of the solution space. And that was Hong and Page's key finding, that groups, they don't fail because individuals lack intelligence. They fail because everyone makes the same mistake. Diversity helps by preventing correlated error. And that's crucial. So enter Rory Stewart, who, while he isn't a cartoon elite, unlike some people who are, and he doesn't hide his privilege, he's like developed this Tory with a conscience brand. And because he is an expert with experience, who is open and reasonable, he just sounds like he has analysed all the angles, so he must be right. You just trust him instinctively. It's like the shipping forecast. But although he is open and curious in certain areas, nevertheless, that is what he is. He exists in a certain ecosystem. And while he challenges thought in certain areas, he doesn't challenge thought in other areas. His particular blind spot is that he exists inside a very specific intellectual world. And if you look carefully, in the confident and authoritative way that he talks about economics, you can clearly hear how affected he is by homophily. So take, for example, this moment in an interview with Zach Polanski. Zach is talking about a different paradigm, a different intellectual environment. And watch how Rory responds.
Tell us which economists you're listening to. Who are your intellectual influences here?
Brilliant people. So Grace Blakely, Richard Murphy, who's been doing a lot of work on this, Gary Stevenson, who I know you've had on recently, James Medway, lots of different economists, though. A lot of the time it's just reading the stuff that they're talking about. And I think there is a consensus that the neoliberal model has broken and it's not worked.
Consensus where? From people like Gary Stevenson, or where's the consensus? Where's the academic consensus here?
I think the academic consensus is among economists who aren't working for the government. I think they're all looking at government decisions.
You see Gary Stevenson as a sort of pseudo-academic economist, or a...
Who are these pseudo-economists? And note how they're dismissed out of hand.
But I think if you do a degree in economics, it's fair to say you're an economist.
Where are the people with graduate level degrees in economics that you're focusing on here? Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
So this underlines some of our conversation too.
Where are the real economists? No curiosity, no question, just immediate dismissal. And that response is not reason or rational. It is pattern recognition trained on itself.
Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
So in order for Rory to listen, you need not just to be an economist, But Rory relies on this canon of experts. And to be canonical, you need to be in the archive before I listen to you. And I want to be clear here, this is not an attack on experts. It's an attack on the ideology of expertise, about who is allowed to talk on the economy, who is allowed to debate. Because Rory just assumes that his concept of expertise is accepted by everybody. And that attitude is how consensus protects itself. Because when the response isn't this idea doesn't work because of this study or this reason, but when the response is...
But I was horrified beyond belief on the economic stuff. It's not acceptable.
Then you're no longer measuring accuracy. You're measuring conformity. And that is a textbook signature of homophily, because all of the clever and insightful people that you know agree with you, all the academics, all of the fellows you know. So you become so confident in your answer that outside voices...
Horrified beyond belief.
When you have an unassailable point of view, motivated reasoning then comes into play, because you're identified with that point of view. So you find reasons for that point of view to be true, even if it stops you seeing the facts that are right in front of your face at the time. For example, when Rory says...
Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
He even convinces himself that Gary Stevenson doesn't have a postgraduate degree from Rory's very own Oxford University. And so much so that he even had to issue an apology himself to Gary Stevenson for forgetting that fact, even when you put direct proof in front of him of the failings and incompetence of those academic economists from a postgraduately qualified economist that Rory is invited onto his own podcast to talk about economics. Rory doesn't even hear the valid criticism of that academic.
Listen, let me say what happened when I went back to Oxford, right? I went back to Oxford, we had the lecture on interest rates. And I was, at that point, one of the most successful interest rate traders in the world. And we had, at that point, incorrectly predicted that interest rates would go back up 10 years in a row. And I went to him and said, why do you think we're so bad at predicting interest rates? This is an Oxford macroeconomics professor. He said, no, you're wrong. We always knew rates would stay zero for 10 years. This is in 2017. That's just categorically wrong. I was quite shocked, and I tried to explain to him that was wrong. I said, okay, I'm going to send you the data. I went back, I sent him the data. He said, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. We have been wrong. We have mispredicted interest rates. We have mispredicted the strength of the broad economy for 10 years. That was it. He wasn't interested in talking. These guys have been wrong on the big economic issue of our time for 10 years in a row. This guy hadn't even noticed. These guys are so bad, they are unable to recognize that they are bad. I cannot explain to you how serious this situation is. Listen, I know I do patronize them, but the truth is they're terrible. They're terrible, and the world's falling apart, and they themselves get rich while it happens.
But the professors of economics at Oxford are not getting rich while it happens.
They get about
You're confusing two different types of resentment. Look, on the one hand, you've got a model where there's like the super billionaires who are buying seven houses.
You think the professors at Oxford are not rich?
Well, no, wait. You're doing two different things. On the one hand, you're like the people who become professors are losers who couldn't get a job in a bank. And if they had been smarter, they would have got a job in a bank.
Yeah.
And so there are different narratives. They're all got the same narrative, which is...
No, but the thing,
I'm angry, I'm working class,
these guys who become professors,
are rich and ignorant.
They don't make a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
They are there because they don't need the money. They come from rich families.
Rory doesn't even hear the valid criticism of that academic, but instead hears a personal, irrational, working class attack on his hallowed academics.
So there are different narratives. They're all got the same narrative, which is...
No, but the thing,
I'm angry, I'm working class,
these guys who become professors
are rich and ignorant.
When the response shifts from this idea is flawed to this person is flawed, you are no longer measuring accuracy, you are measuring conformity, which is a textbook signature of homophily. And homophily means that economic debate in this country is almost always flawed. And you can see it clearly in the wealth tax debate. Endless discussion of what's the rate, what about capital flight, all totally valid questions. But notice who never enters the room because they don't talk the same language. Renters, nurses, people locked out of cities that they grew up in due to housing prices. Because the economic debate is not failing because the maths is hard. It's failing because we're averaging only the guesses of people who trained at the same schools, who have the same assumptions. And those people are literally dismissing anyone who didn't go to those schools.
Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
Reading, who aren't making the same assumptions. And I'll use another study to show how dangerous missing the whole picture can be. During the Second World War, the Allies faced a problem. Planes were coming back riddled with bullet holes. So engineers carefully mapped where each plane was hit. Wings, tail, fuselage. I don't technically know what a fuselage is, but that's one of the places. And the instinct was obvious. What we need to do is reinforce those areas. But the statistician, Abraham Wald, said, hang on, no, actually, those bullet holes aren't the damage that matters. And the engineers were like, what do you mean? Are you mad? They're bullet holes. They're holes in a plane. They matter. You're not an engineer. You don't understand. We need to make sure there aren't bullet holes in the plane, you idiot. You're just not a serious engineer, are you? But Abraham said, and this is sounding weirdly biblical, but Abraham said, no, those bullet holes are the damage in the planes that came back, that survived. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to log them. The real danger is in the places with no holes at all. Why? Because those planes that were hit in those areas never came back. So the most important places to reinforce are the ones where there are no bullet holes, counterintuitively. So the most important information, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't obvious. It was deeply counterintuitive, invisible. And that's exactly what's happening in economics and political debate today. And it's why urgent calls about inequality and wealth taxes are ignored. Because when you only average the experiences of survivors, the system becomes calm, confident, and catastrophically blind. Because the most dangerous errors aren't the ones you disagree with. They're the ones that never make it into the room in the first place. Which is why Gary Stevenson doing his work is so important, because there are so few people that come from that background that survive, that even get permission to be in the room. That's why Zach Polanski's work is important. And it's why actually I'm doing this channel. Because I survived. If you can call living in a flat share in your 40s surviving. But to be really as clear as I can be on this, Rory Stewart he's not failing a moral test, because it's not moral, it's science. He's trying his best, but he has incomplete data. And in fact, he's dismissed the data that he does receive as inadmissible.
I think the academic consensus is among economists who aren't working for the government.
Rory Stewart is failing a hard measurement problem because he trusts consensus, expert agreement, institutional confidence.
Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
In many domains, that's exactly what you should do, but not in human and decision-making sciences, which is what economics and democracy is. Because when power, status, and similarity increase, consensus stops being wisdom. It becomes a mistake that everyone agrees on. Rory Stewart isn't wrong because he doesn't care. He's wrong because he's reading consensus as evidence. I'll repeat that. Rory Stewart isn't wrong because he doesn't care. He's wrong because he's reading consensus as evidence. It's the confidence you get when everyone who disagreed with you quietly failed the entrance exam. Rory isn't wrong about the planes he can see. He's wrong because he thinks what's visible to him is the whole system. It's like doing a restaurant review, but only asking the people who didn't get food poisoning. His confidence is produced by absence, which is why qualified but non-institutionalized people like Gary Stevenson or Zach Polanski, Richard Murphy, Grace Blakely get labeled as populists or pseudo-economists. But because they're saying something that the current system doesn't even know how to measure. Elite debate presently doesn't recognise those human experiences as hard data. Rory is trusting what feels sensible and familiar instead of interrogating the evidence right in front of him. But if you believe your system already works, if you believe your expertise has already seen clearly, you don't ask the signal that you might be missing. And that's the problem. And it's why science doesn't back Rory Stewart here. Not because he lacks intelligence, but because intelligence inside a closed system isn't protection against bias. It's how bias becomes confident. Because you can argue numbers forever. You can argue theory forever. But you can't argue with how human minds behave once they stop questioning themselves. And one thing is clear. On the economy, Rory Stewart's confidence in established thinking prevents him from taking millions of lived experiences seriously. Which is a shame, isn't it? Thanks for watching.